Thank you. Welcome, Tatiana de Rosnay and Jean Hegland. Bienvenue.
Merci.
I'm let you say hello to each other. I see. Maybe
Hi,
you can tell us
Jean.
where you're dialing in from or tuning in from. Jean is fittingly in the forest, or not so much. But
Jean looks like she's in the forest.
Yeah.
Actually, this is not the forest where I live because the internet's so bad there. So I'm at a dear friend's house in town.
And Tatiana,
I'm in Paris near the Eiffel Tower, as usual.
Very fitting. Setting is going to be a big part of the discussion here. So anyway,
exactly.
I just want to say this is such an honor for my tiny little bookstore in Kensington, Maryland, which is just outside of Washington, D.C., to have not one but two best-selling novelists. For the benefit of the few people watching who may not yet know who you are and what they're missing, I'm just going to do a brief introduction. I promise I won't make it too long because I know the whole point here is for you two to dive into discussion and for us to talk about the books. But just briefly, Jean Hegland, you have written 4 novels. The first novel that you wrote is this magnificent book, Into the Forest, which was first published in 1996. Story of 2 highly precocious teenagers, Eva, an aspiring dancer, and Nell, an academic whose life ambition is to go to Harvard and who likes to read the encyclopedia from A to Z in her spare time. So just a little intimidating. They live in a remote forest of Northern California with their parents, living an idyllic existence, which is then shattered when after a period of time, the power goes out intermittently one day and from time to time, and then eventually completely gone, and their whole civilization as they know it is finished. No electricity, no internet, no cell phones. And they have to turn to the forest to survive. It's also a deep bond between sisters story. It's been called a feminist novel, page turner, and a work of poetry at the same time. It was translated into French in 2017, has become since then a bestseller in France. And in 2015, it was also adapted into film starring Ellen Page and Ebony Rachel Wood. Jean, you are also a speaker and instructor at writers' conferences in the US and around the world. And you live in Northern California, clearly, with 3 children and 4 grandchildren. Bienvenue, welcome. Tatiana de Rosnay needs no introduction. But just in case, she has been recognized by Le Figaro and other media as the most widely read French author outside France. She has published 11 novels, including her best-known book, Sarah's Key, Elle s'appelait Sarah, which has sold over 9 million copies worldwide and was made into a film starring Kristen Scott Thomas. She also has written a biography of her favorite novelist, Daphne du Maurier, called Mandalay Forever, voilà, which was nominated for the Prix Goncourt in 2015 in the biography category. And her latest novel is this Flowers of Darkness, des fleurs de l'ombre in French. It is a riveting, dystopian, intense psychological thriller, very à la Tatiana de Rosnay, set in not too distant future Paris. That is about Clarissa, an author, mother, grandmother, who after a devastating breakup with her husband Francois, leaves home and takes up residence in a very interesting new state-of-the-art building for artists that promises to see to their every need and allow their freedom to create. But with artificial intelligence, think Siri on steroids, and cameras everywhere, Clarissa soon begins to feel watched. Is she just being paranoid, or is something sinister happening? Tatiana wrote Flowers of Darkness in both French and English at the same time. The French translation was published March of this year, 2 days before le confinement, the quarantine in Paris. And the English version is yet to be released, so I was lucky and got to read the advanced copy. Tatiana is of English, French, and Russian descent. She was raised in the Paris suburbs and also Boston, and is married with 2 children and lives in Paris. Anyway, so
thank you.
Tatiana, welcome and bienvenue. You describe being shocked at discovering Jean's novel, Into the Forest. And Jean, you posted yesterday online that you find many similarities as well as many differences in your books. Can you both elaborate? Maybe Tatiana what shocked you?
Well, what shocked me is that I arrived so late to this party. I think I must have been one of the only people who have not read this wonderful book written by Jean Hegland. When I mean shock, I mean that this book was like a slap in the face, although it has so many poetic elements to it. It was at the same time a beautiful read, such an evocative read, something that was so powerful and so potent. And at the same time, there were some parts which, I felt as a fellow writer, a sister writer, oh my God, she's not actually going there. Yes, she is. So I had this both feeling of admiration and also feeling that I know this book was published in 1996, Jean, right? I know it was translated kind of much later in France, becoming this enormous bestseller. And I just found that reading it now, with everything we have gone through and are still going through with this pandemic, the threat that we go through every day, Jean, especially you living in California, living in America, this book that you wrote, what, how many years ago?
It's a quarter of a century.
Okay.
25. Yeah.
Right. Well, this book that you wrote 25 years ago is extraordinarily accurate, and you got it spot on. So that's what shocked me, but both astounded me, amazed me, and thrilled me. So I just want to congratulate you publicly for this book, which was one of the most fantastic reads that I've had in a long time. So merci beaucoup, Jean Hegland. Je disais simplement à ceux qui comprennent peut-être pas si bien l'anglais, à quel point j'admire ce livre qui est tellement actuel aujourd'hui. So thank you for one of the most fantastic reads I've had in a long time.
Tatiana, thank you so much. Coming from you, whose books I have just recently read myself, and I just have been blown away by that. That praise means a great deal.
Thank you.
Jean, what did you find that you recognized in Tatiana's book from your own sense of the world, and what did you see that you connected with?
Well, first of all, I connected just in the Flowers of Darkness. I connected with the language and with the sort of beautifully noticed and described sort of moments and observations and insights about sort of human character. But then, a thing that really fascinated me was how these two very, very, very different books were talking to each other. I mean, in some ways, they're very similar. They've got female protagonists. They're set in the near future, but they're not really books about the dystopia that they're set in. They're about human beings dealing with human situations in a world that's like ours, but not. They both have a lot to do with relationships. They both have a lot to do with nature in totally different ways. And I can't talk about Tatiana's the way I'd like to, because I don't want to give any spoilers, because it's
Right.
Thank you.
in addition to all the other wonderful things about it, it's just a page turner. And I would not take that pleasure away from a reader, because there's just a new discovery on every page. But I really do think that some of the epiphanies that both of those books in totally different ways come to are also similar.
I think, thank you, Jean. I think just to say one thing that we really do have in common is I would use two words: intimacy and resilience. Intimité et résilience. In the sense that our protagonists, women, are in very dire situations at a certain moment in the book, for different reasons, of course, but they have to face something which is very difficult at one point. And I think that these three characters, these two sisters and my Clarissa, have a lot in common in their way of dealing with the very difficult situations that they are going to be confronted with, or two rather.
And actually, you both, they are female protagonists in both cases, and the men are kind of not extraneous, but they're definitely supporting characters around them. Is there a reason that you chose to make the females front and center? And then I have a follow-up question about the dads.
Jean, you want to answer this? Maybe I'll just translate this question for our French readers. Donc, Jennifer demandait pourquoi est-ce que Jean et moi nous avons préféré choisir des protagonistes féminins par rapport à des protagonistes masculins. Pourquoi nous avons choisi de donner les paroles aux femmes? Donc, je crois que Jean va répondre maintenant. Jean, it's up to you.
And also, just a quick follow-up to that. Are we into these disasters that we all face now? Are we better in a crisis, or
Women, yeah, maybe. Well, one of the reasons that I wanted to write about young women because I just was interested in young women. And I had two very, very babies who were sisters, and I don't have a sister. My grandmother didn't have a sister. So I was just fascinated in, what it would be like to be sisters and young women. And also when I was writing this sort of nature story. It's very much about two human beings and their relationships with the natural world. And a thing that struck me early on was most of the stories that I'd grown up reading and loving about human beings, in sort of extreme situations in the natural world were about men. And I love those stories, but they were very much stories about man against nature. And I found that when I was imagining these two young women, that wasn't the story that I would be telling about them. For them, it was much more about learning, nature's rhythms and understanding how to work with the natural world. And whether women are better in disasters, I would have said no, except I recently read that the countries that are, generally speaking, the countries right now that are led by women are doing so much better with COVID.
Interesting point.
New Zealand.
Very interesting point.
Yeah. That's very... Wow, I hadn't even had that in mind, but that's absolutely. Yeah. And then just quickly, the like. Go ahead, Tatiana. Go ahead.
Just to react about.
I was just going to say that it seems like.
I think we've lost Jennifer.
We're at a different time. Uh-oh.
I can hear Jean, but I can't hear Jennifer anymore.
You there?
Yes.
Yes.
But your image seems to have frozen, Jennifer, for some reason. Jean, can you hear me?
Uh-oh.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
and I can hear you.
I will answer your question, Jennifer. So why is my heroine a heroine? Why did I choose to talk about a woman in this situation? I think that in my previous book, I had talked about a young man in the Rain Watcher, Sentinelle de la Pluie, and therefore I wanted to choose a different point of view this time. And I also felt that in this dystopia that I was writing about, it would be perhaps easier for me to relate to a woman's point of view, bearing in mind that Clarissa is a grandmother, a mother, a daughter, a sister, a mom, and therefore I would be, you know, relying on experiences that I could share, perhaps in these tricky, intimate moments. Of course, I haven't gone through at all, and I never want to, what she does discover at one point. So that's why I chose, and I chose a woman, and I wanted, contrarily to Jean, whose two heroines are young, I think they're 17 and 19, right? I wanted a woman of a certain age, what we call in France, une senior, a senior in the sense that she is, you know, quite mature, because I wanted to use her experience. I wanted us to be able to see all the different episodes of her life, and that's why Clarissa could not have been a man in this case at all.
Yeah.
That wouldn't have been possible.
Maybe we could just step back and just also just ask you, vous m'entendez?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
No? Okay. I just, maybe, can you each also just kind of tell us what is it that drove you initially to these stories, and did your initial intention change in the course of writing? But what brought you to these stories in the first place?
Jean, you want to go ahead? I'll just translate.
Jean, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so là, je traduis juste rapidement la question. Donc, Jennifer nous demande, en fait, quel est le point de départ, pourquoi on a chacune écrit ces histoires, quelle a été vraiment l'inspiration pour ces romans, et c'est Jean qui répond maintenant.
I think that the story began as just kind of a sort of a really fortunate container for a bunch of the questions I had at that point in my life. And one, as I'd mentioned already, is just about sisters and sisterhood. And another was about forests. My family, my husband and our young children had just moved into the forest in Northern California. We'd found a beautiful place to live. And I had never, I'd grown up in a landscape without trees. And so I was fascinated by forests. And I was worried even a quarter of a century ago about the future. Every time I opened, you know, the newspaper, it seemed like there was something really dire happening. Things felt precarious. And so this story sort of allowed me to examine and really kind of inhabit those questions that were so interesting to me. And oh, sorry about this.
What is that? A plane?
Oh, God.
Wow.
That's a helicopter. We're not in the forest.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. And I think as I was writing, of course, I mean, one of the reasons that I love to write is that every day that I get to spend with a manuscript, I discover more things. I learn more about the story and about the characters and about the little moments in it. I mean, that's the great pleasure. And I think that one of the things I discovered was that really the question that was driving the book the most was, when we think we've lost everything, what is left for us? What are those things that will see us through? What are the things that matter the most in our lives? And I mean, I can't presume to say anything about Tatiana's work, but it seems to me that The Flowers of Darkness ask that same question.
Yes.
Is that fair to say?
You're right. You're right, even though your book takes place in a forest and mine takes place in a city that has been devastated by attacks. The starting point to this book was when we are invaded as human beings, when our intimacy is invaded because there are so many things that we give online with our phones, we are geolocated, we have everything at our fingertips, we can order things, drones, robots take over. What is left of us as human beings? What makes us human when everything around you is ordained by an invisible eye? In this case, Mrs. Dalloway in my book. And when you try and look behind that, what is left? What makes you a human being in a world that is less and less human? And I think that Clarissa, at one point, she makes a choice. I'm not going to say what it is, but what I really wanted to show is, confronted with the fact that in the name of progress, we are giving so much away of us, of our thoughts, our preferences, everything that makes us human, our imagination, our creativity. How can we keep our sacred places as humans in a world where that isn't even considered sacred anymore? And that's why at the end of the book, although I'm not going to say what happens, but there is something to do with nature, which I think really goes back to your book, Jean, the importance of nature and what we're doing today. How we have to be incredibly careful and aware of what's going on in our natural world. And so that's where I think there are many parallels between your book and mine, and the idea of writing about this future was not something, I didn't sit down and say, oh, I want to write about the future. I want to write a dystopian book. I want to write science fiction. Absolutely not. I just wanted to tell the tale, the story of this woman, and how she is confronted with these incredible difficulties she has to go through. Okay, the book takes place in 15 years. I don't give any dates. You don't either.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
You give no dates. And I think that is the most important thing, is that our books can be read. I think the reader understands very quickly that this is in a very near future. But somebody said to me the other day, vous avez écrit de la science-fiction. You have written science fiction. No, neither of you. We have just taken, the future is already here. And we've just we've upped the ante. We've just made it slightly more dramatic, but everything you describe in your book, Jean, could happen and is happening. And many things that I describe in my book have happened, will happen, are happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That was one thing that really struck me. I mean, we still have the Eiffel Tower, thank goodness.
Which I'm looking at right now. It's still there.
Oh, good. Keep an eye on it, please.
Yes. I'm watching it.
Yeah, right. But everything else, Tatiana, in your novel, it seemed like it's there, or if it's not there, it's going to be there next year. You've turned up the volume a tiny bit. But yeah, it's really the world that we're, unless we think very deeply about it, it's the world we're headed towards.
It struck me reading Jean's novel, and in some ways, Jean's discussion of consumption and the need to turn to nature was almost a before cautionary, before climate change is coming. And Tatiana, yours is set in a little bit farther out into the future. That's kind of like, that's the after, and it's the effects are apparent there, and then you've taken it a step further. It's kind of scary. Are you scared by your own predictive powers, the two of you?
Well, I could be, because my previous book was about a great flood of the Seine happening now. And when I wrote it, the Seine started flooding.
Oh my gosh.
So I began to think, hey, wait a minute. And then the parts where Clarissa is confined in her apartment, I had written them before the lockdown. So that was kind of scary. But there's one thing I'd really like to point out about the dystopian aspect of our books. Many people are put off when you say the word dystopie. They think, oh my God, this is going to be something terrifying and it's going to be so dark. Yes, our books are dark because they describe a future that is worrying. Of course, this is not, I don't think Jean Hegland writes feel-good books, and neither do I. At least these are not feel-good books. But I think that in the way that you have written the end, and the way that I've written my end, without giving away too many things, the most important thing, I think, is how these people are going to face everything they're going through, how they're going to survive in every, survival, it's a word you can put many things in it. And that's why the end of your book, Jean, without revealing it, I found brilliant. And I couldn't imagine any other ending. And that's why I want our readers to realize that it's not because you write about the future that you necessarily make it dismal and frightening. And I'd like your thoughts on that, Jean.
Well, one thing that really strikes me is that I often talk about Into the Forest as being, because some readers say it's really, really dark and it's hopeless. And I agree.
I disagree.
It's dark, but I think it's very hopeful. And the way I talk about it is that it's a hard-won hope. And I think that hope that doesn't come easily is more durable. Tatiana, there's a phrase in your novel that really resonates with me, and that's timid hope. There's a timid hope. And
a timid hope, yes. Un espoir fragile et timide.
Yeah. And when I ran across that phrase, and I won't say where, it struck me that we're really talking about the same thing there. That
absolutely,
this happily ever after, everything's going to be grand, but there's some reason that to cling to and to go forward with.
Absolutely, and a word that's so important in both our books, as I mentioned earlier on, is resilience. Mm-hmm. La résilience. These sisters fight for what they have to do. Clarissa fights, although my book flirts more with paranoia than yours does, obviously, because Clarissa is fragile, and her past is coming back to haunt her. I really did want to talk about paranoia and how it can make you, get caught up in a sort of trap of imagining things that aren't really there, which is not exactly the case with your heroines, because they are probably in a situation that's more extreme. Mm-hmm. I think these two sisters, mm-hmm. In the forest, they are, after all, fighting for their lives, really. Mm-hmm. Whereas Clarissa, it seems, is fighting to keep her privacy and her intimacy from being invaded by whoever is behind the Casa residence. But it is a threat as well, and it's an invisible threat, mm-hmm. which perhaps makes it just as awful.
I mean, Clarissa, it seems to me, is fighting for her life, because she's got all the history that my heroines don't have. And she's got tragedy and trauma.
You're right. You're right.
That it seems to me that if she isn't able to find ways to resolve those sort of long-standing tragedies and traumas, she'll have lost her life.
You're right.
It seems like a dire struggle.
You're right.
In many
ways. Right.
So, switching gears for just a second, I wanted to talk a little bit about your literary influences. Tatiana makes reference, and not only makes reference, it's a simple part of your story with Clarissa is that her relationship with the writers she admires, Virginia Woolf, Romain Gary, and I was just wondering, I guess what Jean's literary influences are in general, and then also within this, if you want to call it dystopian, stick with that genre, kind of who do you admire, who influences you in both ways?
Alors, donc Jennifer nous demande...
Jean, do you want to go first?
I'm just translating. Jennifer nous demande nos influences littéraires. Pourquoi je mentionne Romain Gary et Virginia Woolf dans mon roman. Et donc, va demander à Jean aussi qu'est-ce qui l'a influencé en tant qu'écrivain, en tant qu'écrivaine. Quelles sont ses influences littéraires? So, over to you, Jean.
Well, Jennifer, thank you for asking that question, because if you hadn't asked it, I would have, because I can't wait to hear what Tatiana has to say about Virginia Woolf and Romain Gary. I'm really influenced by everybody I ever read. I mean, I'm just this sponge that's constantly
A sponge.
getting.
Exactly it.
But both inspired and cautioned. It's like, oh, I don't want to do that. I want to. Some of the, if I had to be alone on a desert island with only one book, it would be Shakespeare's complete works. My most recent novel is actually about a Shakespeare scholar, and
interesting.
So for me, he's the writer that means the most. But I love George Eliot and Alice Munro, and just so many more recent people. And I don't read a lot of dystopian fiction, frankly. I was very surprised.
I don't either.
I was very surprised when I realized that I was writing something.
Me too.
It's difficult. It's hard when you get classified in one genre, right? Because I mean, it could be, it's so many things at the same time. That must be a little frustrating, maybe sometimes.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
It's young adult. It's survival. It's psychological. Well, in Tatiana's case, psychological thriller, and in Jean's case, it's a very psychologically intensive story too. Tatiana, what about you? Do you want to talk about Virginia Woolf and Romain Gary, or can you?
Yes, of course.
Share the love to others.
Absolutely. Well, I was first of all influenced by Daphne du Maurier, and that's why I wrote Manderley Forever, which I hope you'll read, Jean, which is really the story of a writer putting her footsteps into the footsteps of another writer. She influenced me ever since I was a very young girl, had just started writing myself. Daphne du Maurier has been wrongly cataloged. We were talking about, pigeonholing an author, and she's been wrongly defined as a romance Gothic writer when she's absolutely not that at all. I don't know if you've ever read Rebecca, and how beautifully dark it is and evocative, and her short stories, The Power of the Birds, for example, Don't Look Now. So she has been a great influence in my life. I'm very interested in, as a writer and a reader, in places and how they harbor memories, how they can give you, how walls can murmur things to you. And the reason why I chose Romain Gary and Virginia Woolf to have such important parts in Flowers of Darkness is because it seems to me that they are writers who are also very interested in places, but also because they committed suicide in their own homes. Clarissa being a fragile woman, as we understand quite quickly, and she came to writing as late in her life, and so therefore her link to these enormous iconic writers is through places. As she used to be a property surveyor, géomètre as we call in France, it's a pretty word, géomètre. She measures places. That's what she's done all her life. And she comes to writing through Romain Gary's apartment, and she has a sort of incredibly potent moment when she visits Virginia Woolf's home in near Brighton. And what I wanted to show here is how for a writer, a place can be defined in three different ways. There is the place that the writer works in, the home, la maison, where the writer lives and works and sometimes dies, which you can follow geographically, which you can actually go to. Like I went to Menabili, where Daphne du Maurier wrote her book. So there's the place, the house, the home. And then, of course, there's the body of the writer, which can also be like a house in the Georges, in the Gaston Bachelard sense of the word, in the sense that our bodies are like houses, and houses keep memories. And Clarissa, in this case, has gone through an enormous amount of suffering with her own body for reasons that we will discover. So she almost feels like her body is a story in itself. And then, of course, and as a writer, Jean, I'm sure you will understand this, there is a place where we as writers take our readers, which is the place that we create when we write. And we are the only ones to have the keys to these places. And this is where we take our dear readers who are listening to us now. And so there is these three dimensions in the power of the word space, les lieux, as we call them in French, les lieux, which is a beautiful word, lieu, places. And this is what I wanted to show here, the extraordinary importance of where we live, how we inhabit these places, how we, prendre possession, as we say in French, how we make these places our own. And this is why there's always been houses in my books. And I was very interested, Jean, in how you described the house in your book, the beautiful way you describe it. So Nathalie is appearing. So maybe this means that we have to on arrive à la fin, Nathalie, c'est ça? Non, pas maintenant.
Terminez tranquillement,
okay.
Je poserai les questions.
So I hope I didn't ramble on too long here, but
Not at all.
it just seemed to me that Virginia Woolf and Romain Gary, who have never been put together, I mean, in the sense that they probably never read each other, they probably never met, of course, but they had something in common in the sense that they have left something behind, like somebody leaving a trail in a forest. And so we are following them. And that's what I tried to do here.
May I just say very quickly, Tatiana, that thanks to you, I went back, after reading Flowers of Darkness, I went back and read Mrs. Dalloway.
Oh, great. Oh, yes. Wonderful.
And I have to say, I hadn't read that book, probably since I was in college. And it was just such a delight to rediscover that book. So
I'm so glad. That is a beautiful compliment for me. People who are saying that they are reading Romain Gary and Virginia Woolf. It's like honey to my ears.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank
you both.
Oui, merci. On a terminé. On pourrait continuer des heures, mais on a terminé.
Alors, j'ai une grande question. Qui l'eût cru qu'un jour je serais traduite par Tatiana de Rosnay, traductrice? Alors, je vais la poser. Attention, elle est très longue. C'est Carole qui la pose. Curieusement, un des livres traite de l'envahissement des moyens modernes et du stress qu'ils nous procurent, et l'autre de la disparition de ces outils. Et ces deux phénomènes sont tout aussi angoissants. Vouliez-vous nous interroger sur la place que doivent tenir ces outils pour nous secourir sans nous envahir?
Okay, so how can I translate that? So this reader would like us to question the importance of the way we communicate. J'imagine qu'elle veut dire les ordinateurs, les téléphones. Voilà.
Oui.
The importance. C'est dommage que je ne vois pas la question apparaître, parce que si je l'avais vue apparaître,
Ah oui.
Ouais,
J'aurais-
on me l'a
Comment
posé
ça
à
se
moi en
fait?
privé. Parce qu'elle m'a été
Tu peux
posée
répéter?
directement à moi en privé.
Alors, est-ce que tu
Tu
peux la
répéter encore une
répéter?
fois?
Oui, parce que c'est un peu long ton introduction, donc vas-y.
Et doucement.
Oui, et je vais la couper en plusieurs fois. Go ahead.
Attends, tu veux que j'essaye de... Je ne sais pas si je peux essayer de te la copier pour que tu la vois. Si c'est
Oui.
plus... Ah, je ne peux pas copier. Ah non, je ne peux
Eh
pas
ben,
copier.
Alors, vas-y.
Alors,
Lis la première phrase.
Curieusement, un des
Curiously.
livres traite de l'envahissement des moyens modernes et du stress.
Okay, so both of your books deal with an invasion of privacy by technology and the stress that comes of that. Oui.
Et l'autre de la disparition de ces outils.
And the other talks about the disappearance of and the fact that the internet is no longer, like in your book, Jean, you can't use the internet anymore and you can't use technology. Okay, go on, Nathalie.
Et ces deux phénomènes sont tout aussi angoissants.
And both of these things are equally stressful. Okay, got it.
C'est vrai, hein?
Alors, il y a la suite. Vouliez-vous nous interroger sur la place que doivent tenir ces outils pour nous secourir sans nous envahir?
Okay, so the question is, did you want us, the readers, to think about what is the exact place that technology should have in our lives? Is it too, like nothing or too much? Very interesting. Jean, you want to go ahead?
I mean, I think that Into the Forest, once again, it's this experiment of what do humans, what do we really need? What is really going to sustain us? And how can we survive when we think we have nothing? And so I'm not sure that it's a novel that says, oh, we need to give up internet. But I think it is a novel that wants to look very closely at, what does internet do for us, and maybe what does it not do for us?
Yes, I see exactly what you mean, and I'd like to rebondir, as we say, on your answer, to say that my book is certainly not, doesn't have a message either, in the sense that I didn't write this book to say, oh, beware, Big Brother is watching you and technology is going to take over your life. What I really wanted to show, I think, is what is our personal reaction to these things. And maybe enough is too much for you, Jean. Maybe nothing is not enough for me. But it's true that if I could just make a comment about the pandemic, how would we have survived? For example, look at what we're doing now. If we didn't have Nathalie and Frédéric and an endroit où aller to be able to talk to each other, because we cannot go into bookstores. On ne peut plus faire les dédicaces. On ne peut plus faire ce qu'on est en train de faire maintenant. So somehow, in the midst of this pandemic, technology has been almost more important than ever. And it's very difficult to get the cursor right, really. So I don't have the answer to that question, dear. Comment s'appelle la personne qui nous a posé la question?
Carole.
Voilà, so dear Carole, je n'ai pas la réponse à cette question, but it's a very good question. So thank you.
Alors j'en ai une autre de Bérangère, mais celle-là vous la voyez pas non plus, mais je sais pas pourquoi. D'où vient à votre avis le succès remporté par vos livres, qui sont plutôt effrayants en fait?
So Jean, why this nice reader called Carol is asking us, why are books which are pretty scary and frightening, why are they so successful? Is it because they're scary and frightening? What do you think, Jean?
That's a great question. I mean, don't you think, Tatiana, that one thing we do, and Jennifer and Nathalie, you'll have ideas about this too. I mean, don't we read books as a way to have lives that we don't have to have? I mean, they're experiments, right? It's like, what would it be like if I had a sister and she and I were,
in
alone
a forest at the end of the world?
I mean, from a reader's perspective, in this pandemic time, I also feel like, I mean, this has been very frightening for everybody. I mean, we don't know what's happening. The whole world is getting sick. You know, in the same way that I think people look to, you know, La Peste for insight. Sometimes it's, I think, to better understand what's happening. But I also feel like it's like, well, they had it worse. You know, it could be worse. To some extent, we look for a little bit of solace that way.
I think that our readers, Jean is right. Our readers are looking for different points of view. I think that luckily there are so many different writers out there, people who write romantic books, people who write thrillers, people who write feel-good books, people who write, you know, comedies. And I think that today, in the world that we're living in right now, and especially as Jennifer was pointing out, we are living in a very complicated time. God knows when this pandemic will be over. It doesn't look like it's going to calm down very soon. So perhaps reading Jean and I is like a key to a certain situation. Of course, none of us would like to really go through what we describe in our books, but it's a point of view. It's something that we want to share. And once again, this is not science fiction. I would say that, and Jean, you'll correct me if you think I'm wrong, but these are ordinary sisters. Clarissa is an ordinary woman. There's nothing special about them. They're not heroines. They don't have, you know, incredible PhDs or, you know, they haven't done the most incredible thing. They are ordinary women trapped in extraordinary situations. And I think that that's what our readers want to read.
And getting on with it, right? And persevering and figuring out a way through.
Exactly.
And that's
trying to find a solution. Exactly. That's it.
Il y a une question qui vient d'arriver là, qui est: que disent les hommes de vos livres?
So, Jean, what do men think of our books? I don't know. Messieurs, dites-nous, qu'est-ce que vous pensez de nos livres, les hommes? Ask them. I have no idea. I don't go around saying, Messieurs, qu'est-ce que vous pensez de mes livres?
No, I don't go around asking them, but I've heard from I've just been very, very gratified because I've heard from so many men who've really been touched and who've really enjoyed the books. And I've heard from men who said that Into the Forest gave them insights into women.
That's very interesting, and it's true. I'm sure it's true.
Because they're kind of feminist or female-centric books, but your men are also quite nice. And the characters that, you know, well, with the exception of François, but even François in the end,
poor,
you know.
Poor François. I mean, he does write. For the people who have not read my book, François, c'est le mari de Clarissa qui se retrouve dans une situation très compliquée. On va pas dire laquelle. He's in a very complicated situation. But he does write this, I think, quite touching letter.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I would hate to have my husband do that kind of thing.
But it was nice that she let him have his say. You know, she did give a chance to hear him out in the end.
Yeah.
Men have a lot to find in these stories, I think.
Another question, Nathalie?
Oui, il y a une question pour Jean, savoir de quoi parle son prochain roman et s'il sera traduit en français.
Okay, so Jean,
elle peut répondre,
this reader would like to know if you're working on a new book and whether it's going to be translated into French.
Oh, thank you very much for that question. Yes, I am, and I'm working on a new book. I say that I'm nearing the end of the infinite middle. Right. Does that make sense to you?
That sounds very, very promising.
That's very promising. And I would like to think that my French publisher, Editions Gallmeister, it's a book that they'll be interested in. So fingers crossed.
Cross fingers.
Yes, thank you.
Great.
Moi, je n'ai plus de questions de mon côté. Je ne sais pas si Jennifer a encore une dernière question.
One last question from Jennifer.
Je pense que is there anything that I haven't asked that you're secretly wishing to share? There's always something, right?
I'm secretly wishing to meet Jean in the near future. And I can announce here that Jean has accepted to write a blurb for the American edition of Flowers of Darkness, and I am so honored and happy, and so are my publishers. So merci Jean for taking the time to read my book, and I can't wait to read your blurb.
You know what? I was going to say it's one of the easiest blurbs I've ever written, except I want to just make it perfect, so it'll take a little bit.
Oh, I'm so happy. Thank you so much, really.
Yeah. And you know, in California or in Paris, we'll meet. I look.
We will. Absolutely.
You know, we'll be over. We'll get together.
And you can sign this for me.
And you can sign this for me.
Yes.
Most importantly, everybody watching, make sure you buy these books. You will not regret it.
Oh, thank you, Jennifer.
A wonderful, wonderful book.
And merci Nathalie.
Alors, je rappelle que ce soir, il y avait 2 librairies partenaires. Il y avait la librairie Bookstore à Biarritz, pour ton côté basque, Tatiana.
Oui,
et
bonjour le Bookstore.
La page à Londres. Donc, vous pouvez aller acheter.
Et la page à Londres.
Voilà, les 2 livres, je les remontre. Là, les voilà. Les fleurs de l'ombre de Tatiana de Rosnay et Dans la forêt de Hegland.
Et chez nous aussi, hein?
Et oui, bien sûr, à Washington.
And here is the American edition of Into the Forest.
Alors, je voudrais juste rassurer les participants.
Oui.
La vidéo qui sera en ligne sera complètement traduite et sous-titrée. Donc, vous pourrez revoir dans l'intégralité tout ce que Jen et Tatiana ont dit en français, puisque ça sera sous-titré. Avant de nous quitter, je voudrais juste dire que demain, on sera là à 19h avec une soirée spéciale Parcours d'écrivain avec Roland Brival. Et pour la 80e rencontre un endroit où aller, ce sera Frédéric Deguel qui sera à ma place et qui présentera cette rencontre.
Est-ce que Frédéric peut juste revenir 2 minutes?
Oui.
Frédéric, s'il te plaît, parce que tu peux revenir pour qu'on puisse te dire, can we say goodbye to you and thank you, because all this, c'est grâce à Frédéric. Frédéric qui a eu l'idée de faire une belle rencontre entre Jean et moi, donc, et qui a eu l'idée aussi de contacter Jennifer à Washington. Donc Frédéric, je crois que tu n'as jamais eu une rencontre aussi internationale qu'aujourd'hui.
Absolument. Je voudrais rajouter que c'est quand même Isabelle, le marchand à la page de Londres.
Oui, merci
qui
Isabelle.
Qui pouvait faire la rencontre et qui a contacté Jennifer et j'étais absolument ravie. Merci à toutes.
Thank you. Merci à vous toutes. Thank you so much, everybody.